Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Welcome to episode 89 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 89. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murder. Yeah, it is a big 89. Can't believe we've got through 89 of these episodes.
89 episodes and 10 exclusives.
Yes, that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, Zig, I will let you go ahead and take over on the nerdery side of the house.
Excellent. I have a question.
Okay.
Will you pick up the receiver and know that I'm a believer?
I don't know what that means.
But I'm your own personal Jesus.
Oh, okay. Line from that song. Okay. I do know that song.
Today we'll be talking about Depeche Mode.
Cool.
3 albums by Depeche Mode specifically. This was requested by one of our listeners, Shelley Clark.
Cool.
Who I need to remember to get a sticker for. So I'll get her a sticker. Depeche Mode are an English electronic music band formed in Basildon, Essex in 1980. The band currently consists of Dave Gahan and Martin Gore. Depeche Mode's origins date back to 1977 when schoolmate Vince Clarke and Andy Fletcher formed a band called No Romance in China, with Clarke on vocals and guitar and Fletcher on bass guitar. Fletcher would later recall, "Why am I in the band? It was accidental right from the beginning. I was actually forced to be in the band. I played the guitar and I had a bass. It was a question of them roping me in." In 1979, Clarke played guitar in an Ultravox influenced band, The Plan, with friends Robert Marlowe and Paul Langwith. In 1978 to 1979, Martin Gore played acoustic guitar with a duo with Norman and the Worms with school friend Phil Burdett on vocals. In 1980, Clark and Fletcher formed a band called Composition of Sound, with Clark on vocals, guitar, and Fletcher on bass. Soon after the formation of Compositions of Sound, Clark heard Wirral Peninsula-based Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD. I forget, OMD was really influential with a lot of these guys. Their name comes up a lot.
Sure.
But their output inspired him to make electronic music. Clark and Fletcher then converted to an electronic act, working odd jobs in order to buy synthesizers or borrowing them from friends. They were soon joined by Martin Gore as a third instrumentalist. Fletcher had listened to OMD, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, Kraftwerk, The Human League, and punk rock as influences on all three of them. Dave Gahan joined the band later in 1980 after Clark heard him perform at a local Scout Hunt jam session, singing a rendition of David Bowie's Heroes. The first live concert of Composition of Sound as a four-piece with Dave Gahan on vocals was on June 14, 1980 at Nicholas School, Basildon, England, UK. There is a plaque commemorating the gig at the James Hornsby School in Basildon, where Gore and Fletcher were pupils. Gahan and Gore's favorite artists include Susie and the Banshees, Sparks, Cabaret Voltaire, Talking Heads, and Iggy Pop. Gahan's persona on stage was influenced by Dave Vanian, frontman of The Damned. Gahan also credited David Bowie, James Brown, Elvis Presley, and Prince. So Dave Gahan also dyed his hair bright orange. And because he's a real skinny dude, or was back then, he looked a lot like David Bowie from the Great White Duke period. That was one of the reasons why they wanted him in the band. So later, Composition of Sound would become embarrassed by their band name and started thinking on changing it. There were several potential variants, including the name Musical Moments, suggested by Vince Clarke, as for both the band name and the name of their first album. Starting in 1980, the Bridge House gig, Composition of Sound changed its name to Depeche Mode. Explaining the choice for the new name, taken from a French fashion magazine, Depeche Mode. Gore said it means hurried fashion or fashion dispatch, and they like the sound of the name. However, the correct translation of the magazine's name, and hence the band's, is Fashion News or Fashion Update, from the old French word dépêche, as dispatch. So the lineup was formed with Dave Gahan, Martin Gore, Andy Fletcher, and Vince Clarke. Now, having said this, Andy Fletcher has passed away recently, like in the last 6 months. He was kind of the leader of the band for a long time because he wasn't the most gifted musician, but he did have a good head for facts and figures, and he dealt with the club owners, basically getting them paid. If it had to been for Andy Fletcher, or Fletch as he was known, they probably never would have made it. He also dealt with managers and dealt with record companies and things like that. So they released their debut album, Speak and Spell, in 1981. So they started as Composition of Sound in early 1980, and by late 1981, they released an album with a hit on it. They kind of broke out in the new wave scene at this point, with I Just Can't Get Enough.
Song I'm very familiar with.
Yes. And, but then Vince Clarke left the band. So they didn't know what to do. So they did another album called A Broken Frame, and Martin Gore started writing the lyrics because Vince Clarke was their primary songwriter. After this, Vince Clarke went on to do the Association, which lasted a short period of time, and then Vince Clarke went on to form Yaz with his friend Alison Moyet, or in England it was called Yazoo, but over here it was called Yaz because there was already a Yazoo band from the 60s. But yeah, and then after 2 albums with Yaz or Yazoo, he formed Erasure with Andy Bell, and that's who he's been with ever since.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Vince Clarke's all over electronic music in England in the early 80s.
Yeah, I love Erasure too.
Mm-hmm. That's all Vince Clarke stuff. But they wanted to do, after Clarke left, they wanted to do kind of more serious stuff because that's where Martin Gore's head was at. So they got another keyboard player who ended up becoming a part of the band, a man by the name of Alan Wilder. And that lineup continued for the next 13 years. So they did Broken Frame, and they did another one after that. But the period I want to talk about is where they were in their sweet spot. That is Black Celebration, Music for the Masses, and Violator. In this period, they also released a concert album called 101 that was filmed and recorded at the Pasadena Rose Bowl. You know, that stadium where the big college games are?
Right.
Yeah.
That stadium.
That, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, that stadium. Anyway, so they ran up and down. It is on the Pacific Coast Highway or Highway 101. It was also the 101st and 102nd show of that tour. So they thought 101 is a great idea. I don't really want to talk about 101, just kind of as a background. It kind of kicked the band off a little bit. So Black Celebration was released in 1986. It's the 5th studio album by the electronic English music band Depeche Mode, and it was released on March 17th of 86 by Mute Records. The album further cemented the darkening sound created by Alan Wilder, because Alan Wilder was really kind of into goth music. So he kind of brought that with him, because everything before that was kind of happy-go-lucky. Plus, Martin Gore kind of liked the whole leather daddy look, so he would go on stage in like a leather halter, instead of a shirt. So it'd be like straps of leather with big silver rings holding it together. And he kind of wanted to play on that. So there's some of that written into the music as well. Alan Wilder was also with them for Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion. And then Alan Wilder was dismissed from the band by Fletch, which I think was a bad move. Because I think some of the best stuff came out in this period. At least this is when I discovered it. So to promote the album Black Celebration, there was a tour, and then later on they did a 3 years celebration tour. Spin ranked it as number 15 on its 25 greatest albums of all time list. Black Celebration had the titular Black Celebration, Fly on the Windscreen Final, which they recorded several times, A Question of Lust, Sometimes, It Doesn't Matter Too, A Question of Time, Stripped, Here Is the House, World Full of Nothing, Dressed in Black, and New Dress.
This is probably the album I'm least familiar with.
You've heard Stripped, right?
Maybe.
Let me see you stripped down to the bone.
No.
I'm murdering the vocals. I can't get anywhere near Dave Gahan's range.
No, I don't know this one.
Contemporaneous reviews of Black Celebration in the British press were mixed. Melody maker Steve Sutherland lambasted the album and wrote, Depeche Mode came off as pussycats desperate to appear perverted as an escape from superficiality of teen stardom. This is not a great. I still think that that this was the beginning of their rock solid uh, period. I like the stuff before. I don't really care for the stuff after, but this is kind of their sweet spot for me. Um, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails cited Black Celebration and its subsequent tour as an influence, said it helped him inspire to write and perform the album Pretty Hate Machine. So, that's a pretty big kudos. But yeah, at the time they just Depeche Mode was kind of seen as a bubblegum band. Again, in Europe, they're a pop band. They're not they're not a they're not an indie band over there. It's only over here. Um, and honestly, I never saw them as an indie band either. I kind of always saw them as, dance music.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, but Black Celebration, I love all of the songs on this. Black Celebration being one of my favorite Depeche Mode songs of all time. But, and I will say this, with Black Celebration, it's missing something. I cannot put my finger on what it is, but on their next album, Music for the Masses, it's got more of whatever Black Celebration was missing, if that makes sense.
I love Music for the Masses and Violator. Yeah. Those are great albums.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think Violator fully hits the mark. Music for the Masses, I still think was missing something. It had more of it than Black Celebration had. And again, I can't define what that missing thing is. And because the songs are just as hooky, written the same way. They would go out and they would go to like junkyards with a tape recorder and a microphone and start beating on things and just record beats, which is why you get that, at one point in Black Celebration, and I want to say in Music for the Masses, they recorded a ping pong ball. So, they dropped it from 5 or 6 inches up and let it kind of bounce on the table and added that into the song. So instead of sampling records, they were sampling sounds. So the next one, again, is Music for the Masses, which was released in 1987, so 2 years later. Or I'm sorry, 1 year later. It's the 6th studio album by Depeche Mode, and it was released in September of 1987, so a little over a year and 3 months, I want to say. The album was supported by the Music for the Masses tour, which launched their fame in the U.S. when they performed at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. And that's when they made the 101, not only the album, but the movie as well. And they had honed the touring of that show so well that the live, other than the audience sound, the live recordings sound just as good as the albums, if not better. 101 was incredible. It was a 2-cassette album, and it had basically everything on Music for the Masses, as well as some stuff off Black Celebration and some earlier stuff. This is where they used a lot of the sampling from junkyards and things like that. Daniel Miller co-produced Depeche Mode's previous album, the Black Celebration, voluntarily stepped away from production duties for this album, citing the growing tension in the studio that he had experienced during the recording of Black Celebration. With Miller's approval, the band co-produced the album with David Bascom, who had previously worked as a recording engineer with Tears for Fears and Peter Gabriel.
The great Peter Gabriel, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can kind of hear it, that some of the ideas that Bascom got from Gabriel, not the other way around, were used on Music for the Masses. Band members Andy Fletcher and Martin Gore both explained the album's title was conceived as a joke. Fletcher said, "This title's a bit tongue-in-cheek, really. Everyone is telling us we should make a more commercial music, so that's the reason they chose the title, Music for the Masses." According to Gore, the title was a joke on the uncommerciality of the album, because they thought it was anything but Music for the Masses. They thought that the stuff that they were recording was going to be played, basically in dance clubs in Europe and not really big in the US. Here are the tracks on Music for the Masses. Never Let Me Down Again, which was a hit. The Thing You Said, which was a minor hit. Strange Love, which was a hit. Sacred, which was a minor hit. Little 15, which was a minor hit. Behind the Wheel, which was a huge hit. I Want You Now, which was a minor hit. To Have and to Hold, which was just an album track, although it did get played on the radio. Nothing, which was also a minor hit. And then Pimp, which is included on hidden track Interludes #1 Mission Impossible, starting at 418. There's also a hidden track on Pimp, which was used in the Bright Lights Big City soundtrack, which also became a hit. The B-side to Behind the Wheel was Route 66. It was a cover song, which was also a hit. So they were making an album that they thought was not going to be commercial. They titled it as something that is commercial and became commercial. So it kind of backfired on them. But yeah, Behind the Wheel, Never Let Me Down Again, Behind the Wheel, Strange Love, and Little 15 all hit the mark. There's not a song on this album that I don't like.
Yeah, I would agree with you on this one.
Yeah, all of them are great. Even the hidden track, Interlude #1 with the Mission Possible theme. And if you bought it in the United States, you could also get that B-side on it as well, where it was a mix of Behind the Wheel mixed into Route 66. If you bought it on cassette, which is how I bought everything back then. So it amazed me. Looking back, I picked up somebody's vinyl copy of it, and I'm like, hey, where's Route 66? It's like, oh, hey, it wasn't on the original recording.
Right.
Like, oh, well, it sucks to be you guys.
Yeah, because I like that recording of Route 66 and Behind the Wheel combined. I really, really do.
Oh, yeah. And good God, that bad boy's like 8.5 minutes long, but it's so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so for the tour for that, they did that 101 album, which everybody bought. It kind of made Depeche Mode crazy. Well, after the end of that tour, I think that tour was over in 89, about mid 89, and they had to take a break. And Martin Gore started playing with guitars more because he's like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of all this electronic music. I'm going to play guitar again. And he started playing with some sounds and things like that. And the rest of the band met him in Italy, I want to say it was. I think he was on vacation, just kind of doing some recording. And they came up and they set up a little studio, and they recorded this song, Personal Jesus. They weren't ready to do an album yet, right? They recorded Personal Jesus, and they were just going to release it as a single, which they did. But when they released it, because it did have some great guitar licks on it, it kind of got them thinking about doing a more guitar-oriented electronic album. So they went into the studio and basically got it recorded inside of 3 or 4 months. That would be Violator. Violator was released on March 19th of 1990. So about halfway through 1989, they get through with this giant tour for Music for the Masses, and going in and having to do some overdubbing and recording for this movie that got released. So it's May or June of 1989, and they're like, okay, we need to take a break, because they've been going pretty solidly for 4 or 5 years. Martin Gore, who's living in Berlin at this time, decides to go down to this little town, like on the sea, podunk little town in Italy, to just chill out. And then he starts thinking about music, records this, gets the guys to come over for a weekend. They record the song. They're going to release it as a single, and it starts to get play. And it's like, maybe we should do an album. All of this takes place in a span of weeks instead of months. So from this idea, say June or July of 1989, they have got an album produced, released, and all the marketing for it March 19th of 1990. Just like that. Just, I think the 2 or 3 months they actually took off, even though they were going to take a year off, helped them out tremendously because
Wow.
the 2 or 3 months just, it cleared their brains
Mm-hmm,
and got them
mm-hmm.
ready for this. So it was released by Mute Records internationally and by Siren Reprise in the United States. So the single they released were Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence was the next single they released before the album. The album propelled the band into international stardom and also yielded the single Policy of Truth and World in My Eyes. Violator reached number 2 on the UK album charts, not indie charts, album charts, and was the band's first album to chart inside the top 10 on the Billboard 200, peaking at number 7. The album was supported by the World Violation Tour. So compared to the previous efforts, the band decided to try a new approach to recording. Alan Wilder said, usually we begin the making of a record by having extensive pre-production meetings where we decide what the record will sound like. Then we go into a programming studio. This time we decided to keep it all pre-production work to a minimum. So again, they run down to this little town in Italy. And Martin Gore elaborated. He said, over the last 5 years, I think we perfected a formula. I demo for a month in the programming studio, and we decided our first record of the 90s ought to be completely different. They co-produced it with Flood, who is a producer. And Wilder began a complimentary working relationship with Flood, able to produce the technical know-how. Because Wilder was a classically trained musician, as well as a sound engineer in his own right. Which is why I think they lost something when they got rid of Alan Wilder. But Alan Wilder had kind of come to heads with Dave Gahan after the World in My Eyes tour, because Wilder was the first one to point out that Dave Gahan had become a heroin addict, and that's where the split with him came. He was not incorrect. Dave Gahan had become a heroin addict. It's just the other members weren't seeing it because they'd known him for, 10, 15 years, and he was just the skinny kid who sang. But it had become a point of contention. And that's why Alan Wilder left. But at this point, they were producing this Violator album. Musically, Violator was described as synth pop, alternative rock, dance, and goth rock. Gore called the track "World in My Eyes" a very positive song, saying that love and sex and pleasure are positive things. The song "Blue Dress," which Gore called pervy, is simply about watching a girl dress and realizing this is what makes the world turn. So let's go over the title of the tracks for Music for the Masses. Or, I'm sorry, not Music for the Masses, Violator. There are only 9 songs on this record. World in My Eyes, Sweetest Perfection, Personal Jesus, Halo, Waiting for the Night, Enjoy the Silence, Policy of Truth, Blue Dress, Clean. All 9 of those songs were released as singles on the dance charts and on the indie charts. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those songs were released as mainstream singles. regarding the album's title, Gore said, "We called it Violator as a joke. We wanted to come up with the most extreme, ridiculous heavy metal title they could think of."
That's
So
funny.
that's
I'd
why,
never thought of that.
yeah, they were trying to make it sound like a heavy metal album. But I mean, honestly, some of those guitar riffs that he recorded, even though they were run through electronics, they had a kind of a pretty heavy metal sound.
Mm-hmm.
With Halo, Gore said, I'm saying, let's give it to this, but there's also a real feeling of wrongfulness. He said he supposes that some of his songs seem to advocate immorality, but if you listen, there's always a sense of guilt. The closing track, Clean, was inspired by Pink Floyd's songs One of These Days from their 1971 album Metal, said Wilder. The Pink Floyd were doing something very different than anyone else at the time. You can hear electronics in there and the influence on classical music. It's got a very repetitive synthesized sound, and the bass riff, which echoes a very hypnotic groove that underpins it, were basically nicked from the idea for Clean. So basically they listen to One of These Days and they're like, we should do like a version of One of These Days, you know? Like we should make it kind of like that, where there's just this simple vocal and then just do all this weird music behind it. And I agree with him. It works because One of These Days is one of those Pink Floyd songs that's just amazing.
Oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. And not even a big album for them. But yeah, so
Metal wasn't a big album?
Metal wasn't a big album.
Huh.
It was bigger than, Adam Hart Mother.
Right.
And, and the More soundtrack. But I mean, the album they did after Metal was Dark Side of the Moon. That was a big album.
Yes.
Yes. Metal was big for them, but it wasn't big. And it sure as heck wasn't as big as Violator.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, talking about these, this was 1986 to 1990. This is when I was basically in 8th grade going into high school. With these basically 4 albums, but one of them was a live album. This really affected how I perceived electronic music and maybe even a little bit of sensuality, because I always found their stuff very sensual, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Not overtly sexual. Well, some of it is overtly sexual, but no, it's more of a sensualness.
Sure.
That I think they captured in this period, which I didn't hear with Songs of Faith and Devotion, which was actually bigger commercially than this period. But I feel like they lost something. And it could have been down to Dave Gahan's addiction issues and, their contentiousness with Alan Wilder. But yeah, I think after he left, the band just didn't hit as well. I think this period is their golden age, as it were, even though it wasn't their most commercially successful, because Songs of Faith and Devotion was their most commercial venture. Right. Even though Violator got pretty close to it, Songs of Faith and Devotion is where they really toured the world. But that's about it for these 3 albums, as far as my notes. What did you think about these 3?
Well, I've always liked Depeche Mode, so I mean, these are songs off everything except Black Celebration. Stuff from Music of the Masses and Violator are both in my playlist already. So I mean, I love the stuff in here. I love Depeche Mode. And I want to give that one song a whirl that I've never heard that you said was that took inspiration from One of These Days. I need to hear that song.
It's Clean off of Violator.
Yeah, I need to hear that one.
Yeah.
As soon as we're done, I think I'm going to listen to that one because I love that Pink Floyd song.
Yeah, you can hear it. They weren't really copying it. They just kind of, you can see where they got the inspiration from.
Right.
Um, um, and you might want to check out some of the Black Celebrations, especially the song Black Celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Question of Lust and A Question of Time they're two songs that I think were meant to be played bookends, almost like We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You, because they put them on the same album. I don't know if that's how they meant to listen to them, but that's how most of the people I know listen to them.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to Black Celebration a little bit because I do, like I said, I like Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode is
if you
one
like
of my
Depeche
favorite
Mode,
favorite bands that I hear on First Wave all the time on alternative rock.
Yeah, Black Celebration. I would get Black Celebration and Stripped. Check those two out. You're gonna love them.
I'll definitely have to do that. Definitely. Well, appreciate you covering those. Glad we could cover something for another listener. We really enjoy covering stuff for our listeners.
Shelley Clark, she asked about this specifically.
That's perfect. Hopefully she has enjoyed her episode.
And don't let me forget to get her a sticker.
Okay. Well, now we go to the downer side of the house where we take over the murdery side.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off All That's Interesting, Wikipedia, Yahoo Sports, and Criminal Minds Wiki, and this is the story of Jerry Brudos, the Shoe Fetish Slayer.
Jerry Brudos, the Shoe Fetish Slayer.
Shoe Fetish Slayer.
Shoe Fetish Slayer.
Yeah, okay, I was wondering if we would trip over those words a little bit.
Wait. Did you say Yahoo Sports?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I found an interesting article on that got me some of my information.
Nice.
So Jerome Brudos, who became known as both the Lust Killer and the Shoe Fetish Slayer, is one of the fascinating criminal personalities featured in the season 1 of the Netflix original series Mindhunter.
Oh, nice. Then I know this guy.
I figured you might. So in the late 1960s, Jerome Henry Jerry Brudos killed at least 4 women in Oregon and used their corpses for his necrophilic fantasies. He became obsessed with women's shoes when he was just 5 years old. In 1944, as he was very young, he happened to notice a pair of stilettos in a junkyard. And intrigued, he brought them home with him, much to the disdain of his mother. When his mother saw him with the shoes, she became enraged and screamed that he'd better take them back to the dump. Brudos tried to hide the shoes from her, but she found out and she burned them. Something shifted in him that day. What could not be destroyed was his growing fascination with women, their shoes, and his burgeoning dark, violent fantasies about them both, and he never looked at women's shoes the same way again. And despite his mother's obvious disapproval, he began to secretly steal shoes so he could create his own personal collection. As Jerry Brudos grew older, his obsession became darker, and what was once merely creepy soon became deadly. By the late 1960s, Brudos had murdered 4 women in Oregon and mutilated their corpses in horrific ways. In perhaps his most horrific act, he chopped off one woman's foot and kept it in his freezer, using it as a model for his collection of stolen high heels. So Jerry Brudos was born on January 31st, 1939 in Webster, South Dakota. He was the second son of Henry and Eileen Brudos, and initially his mother had not wanted another child, but she accepted her fate even though she had hoped for a daughter, but instead she had a second son. Her obvious disappointment quickly translated into open hostility towards Jerry. She was domineering and critical of him, but warm and approving of his older brother Larry. So basically humiliating him, and just showing the favor to the brother.
Humiliation, showing favoritism to another person. Yeah,
right. Making him feel lower on the chain.
Yeah.
As his mother wanted a girl and was very displeased she had another son, she constantly subjected Jerry to emotional and physical abuse. As a child, Brudos and his family would move into different homes in the Pacific Northwest before settling in Salem, Oregon. When Jerry brought the high heels home from the junkyard, she told Jerry that he was wicked for liking the shoes, and his reaction triggered something in him as he quickly developed an obsession with women's footwear. And in subsequent years, Jerry Brudos tested the foundations of his new fixation. In the first grade, he stole his teacher's high heels from her desk, and when a teenage girl visited his home, he attempted to steal her shoes as well. Since the teen was a family friend, she felt comfortable laying down on Jerry's bed to rest, but then she woke up to him trying to remove her shoes. As Eric Hickey wrote in Serial Murders and Their Victims, as he matured, his shoe fetish increasingly provided sexual arousal. As Brudos added to his stolen shoe collection, he also stole underwear. These items, as Peter Vronsky explained in Serial Killers, The Method of Madness and Monsters, were, quote, were mysterious and forbidden totems arousing in him deep erotic feelings that he could not understand or explain. Jerry Brudos may not have understood his feelings, but when he was 17, his most violent fantasies burst out of his head and into reality. In 1956, he attacked a woman for the first time. Again, he was just 17 years old, and he had prepared well in advance for the assault. First, he dug a hole in the hillside where he planned to keep his girls as sex slaves, and then wielding a knife, he abducted a teenage girl, beat her up, and forced her to take naked photographs for him. Just like when he was 5 years old, Brudos was caught red-handed. In his teenage years, Brudos began to stalk local women, knocking them down and choking them unconscious, and then fleeing with their shoes. By the age of 17, he had abducted and beat a young woman, threatening to stab her if she did not follow his sexual demands. Shortly after being arrested, he was then sent to the psychiatric ward of Oregon State Hospital for evaluation, where doctors noted his hatred towards his mother and other women. And in the hospital, Brudos' secret obsessions came pouring out. Doctors learned about his collection of women's clothing and, disturbingly, his fantasy of putting kidnapped girls in freezers so he could rearrange their frozen bodies into sexually explicit positions. But for some reason, the doctors didn't think there was anything seriously wrong with him. Claiming the boy just needed to grow up and mature a little, the hospital released Jerry Brudos back into the public.
Boy just needs to grow up and mature a little.
Uh-huh.
So they had him.
They did. They had him institutionalized, but they're like, nope, nothing's wrong with him. He's just fine. We'll go ahead and release him. Sorry about that. I went on mute. Despite me,
I can't hear you.
No, I was talking and I went on mute. Sorry about that.
No, all good.
Despite that being institutionalized, Brudos graduated from high school in 1957. He joined the Army in 1959, but was discharged by October, possibly due to his alarming obsessions. And I apologize about my dog. After a stint of living back at home, he met and married 17-year-old Darcy Metzler. The couple moved to Oregon, where they had 2 children, and from the outside, Brudos seemed relatively normal. Friends and neighbors recalled that he neither drank nor smoked and rarely, if ever, used profanity. But Jerry Brudos' sexual fantasies permeated his marriage. He demanded that his wife pose nude for him, and he also asked her to clean the house naked while wearing high heels. For a few years, Darcy complied, and it was about this time that he began complaining of migraine headaches and blackouts, relieving his symptoms with night prowling raids to steal shoes and lace undergarments. Brudos would then experience a transvestite period where he would use the female persona as a form of escape mechanism, and all the while a monster was still brewing in Jerry Brudos. After a few years of marriage, Darcy and Jerry Brudos' relationship became strained. Darcy began to focus more on their 2 children, and she started to refuse her husband's more unusual demands. Brudos, feeling rejected, started to prowl the neighbors' houses for women's shoes and underwear, looking for an outlet for an obsession, and in 1967 he found it. Jerry had been walking downtown when he noticed a woman, specifically her shoes. He followed her home and waited for her to go to bed. And then Brudos broke into her house, strangled her into unconsciousness, and raped her. And when he was done, he took her shoes and left. This encounter provided irresistible to Jerry, and he later testified that the woman's limp body aroused him. But the next time, Brudos didn't have to go looking for a victim. Someone actually came straight to him. Linda Slauson was a 19-year-old encyclopedia salesman who came to Brudos' home on business, and Brudos saw his chance. He pretended to be interested in buying an encyclopedia to lure her inside, and while his family was upstairs, Brudos hit Lawson in the head and strangled her to death.
Oh my God.
After killing Slauson, Brudos stashed her body in the garage. He dressed her in different female undergarments and shoes he had stolen and arranged her body in provocative poses. He then cut off one of her feet and stored it in the freezer. And in a sickening echo of his adolescent fantasies, he used the severed foot to model his collection of stolen shoes. Shortly thereafter, he tied Slauson's body to a car engine and dumped it in the Willamette River. At this point, the 18-month killing spree of the Shoe Fetish Slayer had begun. While dressed in women's clothes, Jerry Brudos kidnapped his next victim, Karen Sprinkler, at gunpoint from the parking lot of a department store. In his garage, he forced Sprinkler to put on several different types of women's underwear while he photographed her. Brudos then raped her and hanged her by the neck from a pulley in the garage, strangling her to death. And then horrifically, he had sex with her dead body several times before cutting off her breasts to make plastic molds. And he then threw her body into the river tied to a car engine to weigh it down. In the fall of that same year, Brudos killed again. College student Jan Whitney accepted a ride from Brudos after her car broke down, whereupon he strangled her and raped her dead body in the car. Her car would later be found abandoned at a rest stop between Salem and Albany, and Brudos later hoisted her body from a pulley in the garage and dressed it and photographed her, and then had sex with her corpse multiple times. At one point, he cut off her breasts and made a resin mold of it so he could use it as a paperweight, and then he threw her body in a river, this time tied to a railroad iron. He then attempted to abduct two women at gunpoint. He attempted to abduct 24-year-old Sharon Wood from the basement floor of a car park in Portland, Oregon on April 21st, 1969. And then he attempted to abduct 15-year-old Gloria Jean Smith on April 22nd, 1969, but both managed to escape him. On April 23, 1969, Jerry abducted Linda Saley from a shopping mall car park and brought her to his garage where he raped her, strangled her, and mutilated her body. He decided not to cut her breasts off because they were too pink and instead applied an electrical current to her body in an attempt to make it jump, which failed. And then her corpse was thrown into the Willamette River tied to a car transmission. Boy, he had a thing with tying people to car parts.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, okay, so here's the thing I don't understand. So he cut off this one woman's foot, right, and put it in the freezer. And then he hoisted this other woman up on a pulley in the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Did nobody else? There were other people living in this house.
There were other people living in the house.
Oh my God.
But I don't remember if I have it later in the story or if I read it, but he basically forbade his wife from going into the garage. And because of the abuse that she endured, she submitted.
Okay.
She submitted. So he forbade his whole household from going out in the garage. It's right here. All the while, Brudos collected trophies from his victim, which he kept in the garage to keep his wife finding out. He forbade her from entering this part of the house without his permission. So knew I had it in here somewhere.
Right on.
A few weeks after Jerry murdered Linda Saley, her body was found in the Long Tom River, weighed down by a car park. And as police searched the river, they found another woman weighed down by a car park, Karen Sprinkler, and both bodies had been severely mutilated. The police began to investigate the grisly crimes, and after interviewing students at the nearby Oregon State University, they began to hear stories about a Vietnam vet who had called a few young women looking for a date. One of the women told police that he had mentioned the bodies in the river and had made an unsettling suggestion about how he could strangle her. As it turned out, that man was Jerry Brudos. The police asked one of the girls to set up another date with Brudos, and then they swooped in to interrogate him, and they quickly decided to investigate further. They obtained a search warrant for the Brudos home, in which they found evidence that proved beyond a doubt he was their man. There was nylon rope, photographs of the dead women, and most horrifying of all, the trophies he had kept from his heinous crimes. At some point during the investigation, Brudos confessed to all 4 murders as well as other attempted kidnappings and earlier assaults. Jerry Brudos was found guilty of the murders of Sprinkler, Whitney, and Saley and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, and he escaped conviction for Slauson's murder only because her body was never found. As for Jerry's wife, she divorced him after his arrest.
Mm-hmm.
She also changed her name and her children's names and moved away to an undisclosed location. And although Darcy was charged with aiding and abetting her husband in his crimes, she was not convicted of murdering any of the victims. While incarcerated, Jerry Brudos had piles of women's clothes, women's shoe catalogs that he kept in his cell. He wrote to major companies requesting them and claimed they were his substitute for pornography. He lodged countless appeals, including one which he alleged that a photograph taken of him with one of the victims' corpses could not prove his guilt because it was not the body of a person he was convicted of killing. And in 1995, the parole board told Brudos that he would never be released.
Dude, you're never getting out.
Nope. Brudos died on March 28, 2006 from liver cancer after spending a record-breaking 37 years in prison, making him the longest ever incarcerated inmate of the Oregon Department of Corrections. He was largely forgotten after his death, especially since more prolific killers had emerged over the years. But in 2017, his crimes were revisited in Netflix Mindhunter, and visitors were reminded of his chilling story. Now and forever remembered as the Shoe Fetish Slayer, it's a fitting title for his horrific legacy. And that is the story of Jerry Brudos.
Good Lord.
So did you remember any of that from Mindhunter?
Yes, I did.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. I figured you would. I knew you liked that show.
Yes, I love Mindhunter.
Well, thanks for taking that journey with me. I really appreciate it each and every week.
Well, thank you, sir.
As always, you can find our information on nerderymurdery.com, where you can find more information about our show, links to the items we talk about, as well as pictures. And you can also find the link to our YouTube channel.
Yes, where we have different YouTube playlists, including one for this episode, where you can listen to all three of those albums.
Awesome. Good stuff. You can also find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show you off your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do consider that. You can also find the link to our Patreon, where if you wish to donate to our website to help keep us going, there are costs involved, so both the merchandise and the patrons help us out with that, and we appreciate each and every one of our patrons.
Please and thank you.
And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us, helps others find our content that may be looking for us. And so with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.